Fish Heads from Barnes & Barnes on Revenge of the 80s Radio, a big novelty hit in 1979 that has become an American classic. With me is one of the members of Barnes & Barnes who also spent some time in America. He's involved in a new band, Action Skulls, with Vicki Peterson and John Cowsill. Yeah, you might also kind of remember him as one of the great child stars of the 1960s. Bill Mumy, welcome to Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's good to be here. It's real good.
And we're looking forward to talking about Action Skulls and your upcoming album, but let's take a step back, because most people know you best as Will Robinson from Lost in Space, but you had quite a long resume for a young fellow before landing the part.
Yeah, I'd been working half my life before Lost in Space started. I was very lucky to have quite an eclectic career, working in different genres of film and television. One week I'd be an evil mutant in the Twilight Zone. The next month or two I'd be off making a Disney movie with a raccoon or a seal or something, then go do a Western or a medical show or, Ozzie and Harriet, and then back to the Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock and stuff. Yeah, it was a very diverse few 5-6 years before Lost in Space.
And we're talking big league stuff. You worked with Jack Klugman, Brigitte Bardot, Alfred Hitchcock.
I worked with a lot of great people. Yeah, all those greats back in the day. Lucille Ball, Walt Disney, Rod Serling, Alfred Hitchcock, Jimmy Stewart. I could go on and on. It was a very positive experience.
What got you into acting?
I broke my leg playing Zorro when I was about 4 years old, and couldn't go outside and run around for 8 weeks because I was in a big, massive cast. So I watched a lot of television during that period, and I saw my future father, Guy Williams, as he played my father in Lost in Space, but he was Zorro previous to that, and I just got so into Zorro and George Reeves as Superman, those two caped adventurers, and something about that fantasy life made me just say, I got to do that. I want to get in the TV and be like Zorro or Superman. And we lived in West Los Angeles. My parents had me later in life. My mother had worked at the studios for years before I was born. Her father had been an agent during the 30s. Yeah, he had handled Boris Karloff and a lot of writers and directors. And the bottom line was they were supportive of my energy and decided, to check it out, and it worked out. You had red hair and freckles and some talent, I guess it worked out.
Bill Mumy is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. He has some new music with John Cowsill and Vicki Peterson. We'll talk about that in just a little while. Bill, how did you land the part of Will Robinson?
It was actually offered to me. I didn't audition for it. I'd been working extensively 5 years or so before the Lost in Space pilot was filmed, and Lost in Space was a 20th Century Fox project, and while it was being put together, I was starring in a 20th Century Fox feature film with Jimmy Stewart and Brigitte Bardot called Dear Bridget. And I was kind of in demand, and the studio knew I was working for them, and it was offered to me, and it was exactly what I had always wanted to do in terms of getting inside TV and being a little superhero. So we immediately said, yeah, we'll do that. And the next 3.5 years or so, never had a bad day. I loved being Will Robinson.
Well, from one genius to another, Erasmus was a genius too.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a different, yeah, one of them had Brigitte Bardot, the other had the robot. You had to write Dr. Smith or Brigitte Bardot. What would you rather be on a stranded island with?
That's a tough one, because Dr. Smith came up with all those great robot insults, and it was just superb.
Jonathan Harris wrote all those alliterative insults himself. He had a hoot coming up with those all the time.
I knew it. He was a big star, too.
What a wonderful guy, a one of a kind.
You would be forever paired up with him by all of us nerds, I guess, from then on. But while you were already an accomplished actor, and we talked about that by the time you played Will, how much did you learn about your craft by working closely with Harris?
It's hard for me to really say. I had worked with so many people in so many different styles by the time Lost in Space came along that, Will Robinson, really, if you look at the show, the arc of the series changes so much. It started off as kind of a serious family ensemble adventure sci-fi show, and then it became very kind of high camp fantasy, and then it became somewhat of a melding of all of that together. I think Will always was grounded. I think Will was the person you saw that show through who played it straight from the beginning, whether it was, with a giant cyclops that looked real, or whether it was with a, talking carrot that looked insane. I think Will always played it pretty straight. Jonathan and I had wonderful chemistry together, and I loved him dearly. I don't know how. I felt like I had to stay kind of grounded because he was flying so high. He was so over the top. Oh dear, help me! Oh! He was so big that I couldn't go there with him. I knew I had to keep it grounded, so to speak. But we had wonderful chemistry and never had a bad moment together, ever. He was a very good friend.
Were you playing music while you were acting, or is it something you kind of switched to? I mean, you play a lot of instruments, so it must have been something you started at a very young age as well.
I started playing the guitar when I was 10, and there are 3 or 4 episodes of Lost in Space where Will Robinson is playing, a couple where he's singing. I always brought the guitar with me to the set. When I wasn't filming or I wasn't in school, and I was out, strumming in my dressing room. We're all capable of doing more than one thing, and music has been my main passion and driving force since I was 10 years old. But acting I haven't lost my enjoyment for that. But if you're an actor, in general, you're somebody else's chess piece. You audition, a director and a producer decide if you get the part. A writer, generally, not yourself usually, tends to write your script, and then you're edited by somebody else, and that's great. It's a great gig. But if you're writing your own music and recording it and performing it, you're way more in control of of the project, so to speak. So I probably get more personal satisfaction out of making music than I do out of hitting my mark and reading my lines, but they're both great.
But you still stayed in with acting on and off. You appeared in Babylon 5, a couple other projects.
5 years as an eggplant.
And the movie. How was it getting into that makeup, by the way? Babylon 5.
It was difficult, and it was something that I'm very grateful for the experience, and I have a lot of friends from that project, and I think Babylon 5 holds up really well. It's a beautifully written novel, 5 seasons with wonderful arcs for the characters. But the physicality of going through that makeup process at 5 o'clock in the morning or something, and then the process of taking it off after that 12 hours or so, the glue and the adhesive removers, the chemicals on your face as they peeled that stuff off. I really never acclimated to it. I never really was comfortable in that alien makeup, but they all did a great job.
And soon enough, you became part of the duo Barnes and Barnes. You actually left your biggest musical mark to date with that group, or the duo, I should say, with Robert Hamer, Fishheads. How did that song and the duo come about?
Well, Barnes and Barnes is kind of like doing a television series. Art and Artie Barnes, Robert Hamer, and myself are almost like characters that we play. We've been friends since we were about 12 years old, and we were in a junior high school rock and roll band together, and we've always enjoyed making music together. We also always collected comic books and shared an interest in left-of-center humor and stuff. And way back when we were teenagers, like in 1970, we started jamming as Barnes and Barnes and recording these sessions, which was just kind of a release of excess quirky energy that we never really took seriously. We each pursued our own musical careers as, serious, songwriters and musicians. But Robert sent some tapes off to Dr. Demento in the 70s, the end of the 70s, when his show was globally syndicated, and it took off like wildfire. And then Billy Paxton, we made some videos with Paxton, and Paxton got it to Saturday Night Live, and it just became very successful for us. Fishheads has been really good to us and continues to be fun and profitable.
Bill Mumy is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. He has a new solo album out and a new project called The Action Skulls with Vicki Peterson and John Cowsill. We'll talk about all of that straight ahead on Revenge of the 80s Radio. When Roger Was Jim, a tribute to the Byrds by Bill Mumy. It's a new track from his latest solo album, Velour. Bill Mumy is part of another big new project, Action Skulls, and he's with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio to talk about it. Bill, Velour is a little more rock folk than the folk rock of many of your past albums, including 2016's In the Current. Let's talk a bit about that one, and actually the song we just played, When Roger Was Jim.
The Velour album was largely inspired by various records from the 60s that were keystones of inspiration to me. The Byrds were very high on that list. Marta Kristen, who played my sister Judy Robinson in Lost in Space, turned me onto the Byrds when they first broke back in 1965. And I had been a huge folk music fan prior to that. The Kingston Trio, Pete Seeger, early Peter, Paul, and Mary, and early Dylan. That was my foundation for music. It was really that folky stuff with the harmony of like the Kingston Trio. And when I first heard the Byrds, I realized, wow, these are Pete Seeger songs, or this is a Dylan song, but the groove and the harmony was so powerful that the Byrds became my band as a youngster. When Roger Was Jim, one day that line just struck me, because of course Roger McGuinn, his real name was Jim McGuinn, and the first 3 or 4 Byrds albums he was Jim McGuinn, and then I believe it was a guru who suggested he change his name, and he chose Roger because it was a radio high-tech kind of sound. Roger that. Anyway, that tune just came out. I tried to use all of the instruments that the Byrds used. There's a Rickenbacker 12-string on there, and there's a Gretsch country gentleman on there like Crosby played, a Fender precision bass similar to the one Chris Hillman played at the end, tambourine of course, and a Fender Telly with a bead bender like Clarence White played. So the song was a real tribute from me to a band that I enjoyed greatly and influenced me a lot.
Well, you do play several instruments. We touched on that before: the banjo, the guitar, a little percussion, the mandolin. And what's your axe of preference, if you will?
Well, guitar is my main instrument, although, I'm pretty comfortable on the ones you named, plus keyboards and bass and harmonica and stuff. I have so many instruments, so I'm very, very indulgent in that, luckily. I probably have 75 guitars, so, it really depends on the song and the tonality that I hear. Sometimes an instrument itself will inspire a song, and other times the song will say, wait a minute, I want a Telecaster on it, or I want a Les Paul. They're just different. It's like a painter, what color are you going to use for that sunset tonight? I'm very, very lucky to be able to have so many to pick from in my paint box.
And you do switch a lot in that album, from electric to acoustics, a lot the same song, and a couple of really interesting stories you tell too. And the storytelling songs, we're missing those these days.
Well, I tend to, thank you, and I tend to start songs from a lyrical perspective. Not all the time, but the majority of the time, I'll get a lyric, a verse, maybe 2 verses, sometimes a bit of a chorus. Then I'll usually be a craftsman and finish up the bridge and find the last couple verses or something. I don't tend to say, today I'm going to write a song. They come to me in batches, and I've learned over the decades to really respect the muse when it comes knocking on my door. And all of the songs on Velour are definitely true songs. They're all real, inspired by either personal experiences or friends or characters that I know personally that have gone through the same experiences in the song.
We could go even more in-depth on your musical career, Bill, but I do want to talk about the Action Skulls too.
Yes, please. That's my major new musical project that I'm so happy is finally being released. I am way at my best when I am part of a group. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not pleased with my solo records. I am, or I wouldn't have put them out. But being part of a band, being part of a group, watching other people find the parts as opposed to me dictating the part. It's not like this is a group and I'm hiring guys to play and I'm telling them, no, play this or play that. You know, I will sit with the guitar and strum it, and then Vicki will find, Vicki Peterson, the great singer and guitarist from the Bangles and many other bands that she's been affiliated with, like the Continental Drifters and Psycho Sisters. Anyway, Vicki will find these second parts or the first parts or take a solo that are just really inspiring to me. Her husband, John Cowsill, wonderful singer, fantastic drummer. He's been the drummer in the Beach Boys for 17 years now. And John lays down wonderful grooves and finds great melodic parts, both as a writer and as a singer. And the bass player, Rick Rosas, was the best bass player I ever had the pleasure of recording with. And unfortunately, Rick passed away, but making music with Rick and Vicki and John has been a real treat and a real pleasure. And we cut this record, you know, in an old school way. It was the four of us in the recording studio in the same room, not like, oh, he's off in a booth and isolated. We were in the room together and, you know, trying to isolate our amplifiers as much as possible, but we were all making eye contact and laying these tracks down together live. And then they got sweetened and finished from there. But the foundation for the Action Skulls tracks was a real group effort, and it was a wonderful experience.
Listening to Angels here, and I take two. We should not downplay the fact that we should not downplay the fact that the four of you are very different musicians. You've come from diverse backgrounds of the industry. Listening to Angels here, it would seem that the four of you have forged a unique blend on your own of music.
I think that's true. I'll have to leave it up to others to really, you know, be the critics of the project or put labels upon it. I do know that, you know, when we were playing together, it just fell together naturally, and all of us were excited by what each of us contributed to these songs and this project. Rick had a wonderful saying, which we'd be in the studio and we'd suggest something like left field maybe, and he would say, well, you can't erase it if you don't record it. Which became a mantra for the band. So, you know, it was almost going back to that Barnes and Barnes mentality of there are no rules, we can try anything, and you know, added with the, well, you can't erase it if you don't record it, which always puts a smile on my face when I remember Rick coming up with that one.
I understand the band was conceived at a gathering thrown by Angela Cartwright as well.
Yes, me, Vicki, and John were at Angela and her husband Steve Gullion's Christmas party in 2013. That's when this was, shall we say, fertilized, because the three of us ended up around their upright piano singing until 2 or 3 in the morning, you know, just jamming on Beatles songs and, you know, Brian Wilson songs and stuff. And there was a very obvious power to the blend of our voices when we were singing in harmony together, and it was noticed. We all went like, wow, that's a cool sound. John and I had talked previously for a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, excuse me, I don't want to exaggerate. We had talked about making some music together. John was saying, you know, I ought to play on your records, man. You ought to bring me in. And after that Christmas party, we agreed, hey, you know, we really should see what happens. Have you got any tunes? And I started writing songs like crazy right after that. Different songs than I would write for a solo project, absolutely, and all genuinely inspired. Not like let me sit down and force something, but I was getting these songs that really felt right for the band, as opposed to maybe something a little more folk or bluesy, for myself that I might do. It was a little more. I hesitate to use the word pop because I'm not a huge fan of that word. But I think the songs that I was starting to write for Action Skulls were a little more pop than I would normally create. And I would send little iPhone videos, like with a verse and a chorus, to John and Vicki. And Vicki calls them the bathrobe demos. And I sent them scores of ideas, and then they would choose which songs they either themselves finished, so they became collaborations, or they would say, yeah, this is a really good one, finish that one. So they kind of helped in a big way decide what material we would go into the studio and record. But very early on, after the Christmas party, very early in January, I was at a gig with Rick, and we weren't playing together. We didn't know each other. I was playing with America, and he was playing, I don't think it was with Robbie Krieger. Can't remember who he was playing with that night. Yeah, I think it was Robbie Krieger. Anyway, Rick and I got to talking, and Rick had played with John in the past, and I said, well, I'm getting this idea to form this group, and Rick was like, I really want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that. And Rick was playing with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he'd become the bass player in the reincarnation of Buffalo Springfield with Neil and Stephen Stills and Richie Furay. He was going out with Joe Walsh. He was playing with all these great players, and I was well aware of Rick's abilities, and I was like, are you kidding, man? We would be so thrilled to have you be a part of it. And he actually followed up on that with a text that night at like 2-3 in the morning. He after this gig, he went home and we'd exchanged numbers. And Rick wrote me and said, I'm really serious about this. This isn't like a let's do lunch thing. I'd really like to make music with you guys. And it was meant to be, and we recorded 8 tracks with Rick, and it was just a real treat.
A lot of variety in the album, too. We can talk about If I See You in Another World, a bit of 60s psychedelic vibe, some good folk rock on many of the other tracks, but also, I love this, a very, very country song, Feed My Hungry Heart. And I mean real country, not the crossover pop country of today. Bass, twang, harmonica, everything. That
one came really early. That was one of the first songs that I started writing for Action Skulls. And it just, it fell into that country kind of place. To me, it fell into that birdsy, sweetheart of the rodeo kind of country thing. But we cut that live, not the vocals, but we cut that track live, and it went real quickly. It was very easy. And one of the things that I think is very, I won't say very, but is somewhat unique about Action Skulls consistently throughout the album is it's a project where all 3 singers will be featured on a song, each of us taking a verse, and then the 3 of us coming together in 3-part harmony for the choruses. Now, the Traveling Wilburys did that a bit. The band did that a little bit. But really the inspiration for me and us doing it comes from my love of the Kingston Trio. And we're not playing Kingston Trio, folk calypso world music, but
that's another album.
But they almost always, in their early records, they would trade verses. Bob would take a verse, Nick would take a verse, Dave would take a verse. And I suggested that for Action Skulls. And that had a lot to do with the direction the songs that I started writing took. They were personal lyrics, but they were lyrics that lent themselves to more than one person sharing their opinion within the song. So there's a lot of songs that start with like John singing a verse and then me taking a verse and then the 3 of us on a chorus and then Vicki taking a verse. And I think it's something you really don't hear very often in music. And I feel like that worked really well for Action Skulls.
It's fair, and longtime fans of each of you will have something. It's something that maybe a lot of bands should look at today.
Well, I'm not interested in giving advice to other bands, but I do think it works. It works for us. It's a fresh. I mean, it may be hailing back to 60 years ago, but it's also a fresh approach to a group. And like you said, Chris, there's plenty of Vicki, there's plenty of John, there's plenty of Bill vocally on this record. Yet, as opposed to that being, oh, that's a Bill song, oh, that's a Vicki song, oh, that's a John song. Most of them are, oh, that's an Action Skull song. They're all singing on that. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, I think, as you said, fans of the individuals within the group will be happy about that.
We're going to play Mainstream in just a little bit. That seems like a commentary of the music industry from all of you.
Well, you'd be correct in that assumption. I never like to tell people too strongly of like, here's what this song's about, because everybody hears things in their own way and they make a little movie in their mind, so to speak, from what the lyrics and the sounds tell them. But that song, Mainstream, is about mainstream pop music, mainstream charts. Are you going to be successful? Are you going to be in the mainstream? And people of a certain vintage, around the age of the medium age of the group, it's hard to be successful or get an opportunity to be in the mainstream these days. And the song was definitely inspired by, we're doing this thing together, and we're doing it for the sake of doing it. There's a line in that song about many years ago I heard a drummer on the hill just because. The reason was he's banging up there still. And I think that applies to our attitude. We're doing this just because.
Bill Mumy is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. We're talking about his new group, the Action Skulls, with Vicki Peterson and John Cowsill. How did you get the name? I have to ask that question. The name, Action Skulls.
Well, I'm not so sure everybody's too pleased with that. What happened was one night, John and I, very, very, very early on, John and I were texting, and we were talking about, well, what are we going to call this thing? And he said, I want to call the band Action Figures. And I said, well, I kind of wanted to call the band Peace Skulls. And it was like, okay, we're Action Skulls. Next. and that's really how it happened. And it took several months of us saying, yeah, we're having an Action Skulls rehearsal, or hey, we're having an Action Skulls recording session, before Vicki kind of acquiesced and like went, okay, Action Skulls. and Rick loved it. Rick was like, yeah, Action Skulls. Yeah, bring it on, man. And Vicki was like, you're not really serious about this, Action Skulls, are you?
You can't be Action Figures because you're already one.
Yeah, I'm multiple Action Figures. But also, and I'll tell you this. This is another thing about the name. Bangles, Barnes and Barnes, Beach Boys. I wanted a name that if you were looking at a bin would go first. I liked the idea that we all came from B bands, right? Bangles, Beach Boys, Barnes and Barnes, but that we were an A band.
Then maybe you should have called yourselves the Aardvark Skulls.
Yeah, well, there you go. A little late now, but next band.
Yeah, next band.
You and me, Chris.
Bill Mumy is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Are the three of you planning to continue the project, or is this a one-time creation?
No, I don't think it's a one-time creation. I mean, we've continued. The thing was this. When Rick passed away in November of 2014, we had recorded the foundation of 8 tracks. None of them were finished vocally or sweetened or, layered with keyboards or things like that. And those 8 tracks were so strong, but our feeling for Rick was so strong that it really, it shocked us and it stunned us. And we all just kind of took a couple of giant steps back. Vicki had a tour with the Bangles. John is always out with Mike Love and the Beach Boys. I did a film called Space Command, and I'm a producer on a television series called Ancient Aliens. So I was producing some projects for television. I was making a film as an actor, and I was doing my solo stuff. And we all stepped away from Action Skulls for quite a bit of time, close to a year. And then we continued to communicate, but there was this hiatus because of other projects and because of the loss of Rick. And then very slowly, we just all started to say, man, this stuff is too good. This stuff is too good to just let it sit and not finish it. And so we said, well, let's see what happens when we come back together. And, the vocals were so strong, and we had such a good time singing together that we very clearly said, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna finish this. It's gonna be, sharing some of the last studio stuff Rick did, and we're going to see this through. So the whole project's taken 3 years, but Vicki and I were talking just the other day. We were together, and she said, okay, next one, 3 months. I said, oh, that's a deal. I said, you got a deal. So we are talking about, continuing to be skullacious together. And I look forward to that. John, it's interesting to see how hard the Beach Boys tour. Mike Love must be 77 years old or something. They're playing over 200 gigs a year, all over the world. And they play like 45 songs a night. And those Brian Wilson songs are tough songs to play and really tough songs to sing, But, man, they're out there, really, really doing it. So, it's not my place to suggest John quit his day job so that, we can action skull more often. But when he is available, we are definitely planning to do some more stuff together. I hope I hope the album is well received, because it would give us the impetus to continue. And I think it's a worthy project. I love the way our voices sound together.
The Action Skulls album with John Cowsill, Vicki Peterson, the late Rick Rosas, and our guest Bill Mumy will be available on September 29th. Bill's Velour is out now and can be found on Amazon, iTunes, and other digital outlets. Bill Mumy, thank you for coming on with us right here on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris, and hope you dig the album.
We dig it already, and we're going to play it. Let's play a track from Angels Here Now. Mainstream, new from the Action Skulls on Revenge of the 80s Radio.